What's up guys, we got 8 new IEMs today, and starting off with the brand new Performer 8S from a Fool. I have now confirmation that I've been blacklisted and shadow banned by a Fool and Hi-Fi Go. So shout out to all the channel members and for all the support. Without you guys, I wouldn't be able to buy some of these IEMs like the P8S and the binary to review for you guys, so shout out to you guys. Basically, the main reason is because I pointed out too much of the negative flaws of some of their products, even though a lot of people, got the Explorer because of me. They got a lot of the Fool stuff because of my recommendation. But that aside, the overall sound of these are neutral with a slight bite when it comes to the treble. Now, if you are familiar with a Fool's kind of house sound, this follows that pretty well. It's very similar to the 5+2 actually, but just, a little bit less forward in the vocals even. So this is very neutral. And it's basically the Performer 8 but with a sub-bass boost, and it scales slightly better now because there's less treble energy. Tech-wise, these are competitive for the price. They are around the DUSK level. I wouldn't say they are a value monster or top of the price bracket when it comes to technical performance, but it is enough. You're gonna find the details, the layering, the separation to be very well done, especially because everything is like more pushed back. The vocals are cut, it's less forward in your face, it's more laid back, and then the treble is also pretty decently done, and the extension is enough. Again, I wouldn't say this is airy. It does have that slight bite when it comes to treble. Now, the mid bass could be a little bit more in focus or like a little bit more highlighted, right? But I think for most like rock instrumentals, drums, these are enough. They're not like meaty, they're not warm leaning, they're not overly colored when it comes to the low end. Again, this is more of a neutral kind of sound. These are not a mid volume set. I wouldn't recommend you listening to this anything lower than like 70-75 dBs because the vocals are just completely gone at that point, since the upper mids cut is pretty aggressive. Again, it's basically like a straight line, very similar to the original Performer 8. So you do need to crank these a bit when it comes to the volume, the scaling. You need to push the vocals a little more forward with the volume so you can hear the extension, the clarity. You feel more power when it comes to the mid-range, whereas if you're just, kind of have it in the background, it's gonna sound very dull. However, the second issue is if you do try to crank up the volume, the treble also gets a little bit like sharp and metallic-y. I don't know if it's just their house kind of sound, because the 5+2 also kind of sounds like that. The Performer 8 also has a similar, bite when it comes to the treble. Has that like slight, I don't want to say graininess, but slight metallic feel, metallic shine to the overall sound. So when you do try to push the vocals more forward with more volume, what ends up happening is that the treble starts becoming a little bit too aggressive, has a bit too much bite at higher volumes. So you can't really crank it up to the max and have that immersion like the Full Explorer, but you also can't listen at mid to lower volume because it just sounds too dead. Like the vocals are completely gone in my opinion. It hovers around like a mid to high volume range, but at that volume like dB level, you also don't get the vocals like fully, because again, due to the upper mids cut, the vocals are like, it needs more volume, right? And then once you crank it up at higher volumes, the treble starts getting a bit too much. So they either need to boost the vocals a little bit more so it sounds more correct. You have the power, the extension, while having the treble as well at mid to high volumes, or they need to smooth out the treble a little bit more so it doesn't bite your ears at high volumes and take you out of the immersion. That aside, these do sound good when it comes to instrumentals, orchestra, classical, basically anything that doesn't need the vocal boost or the scaling. You can just have these at mid volume on a classical track, instrumental track. Vocals are pulled back so there's more room and there's like better clarity when it comes to separation, stuff like that. And if you listen to K-pop and J-pop at mid volume, these are pretty decent because it kind of helps tame the upper mids that are usually over boosted on those tracks, and you still get enough of the treble at mid to high volume. It doesn't become too aggressive at that volume range, and you have enough sub bass, enough low end to kind of have the balance. But I would definitely not crank these up. But that aside, I wouldn't really recommend it for hip-hop because number one, the vocals are kind of pushed back. It could use more slam in the mid bass or just boost in general when it comes to the low end, and the treble again also gets a little bit the bite gets a little bit too much when it comes to like cymbals. You know, you got your electronic stuff. It doesn't scale very well when it comes to hip hop. Even rock, I wouldn't really recommend these because the vocals just isn't there when it comes to the power, the extension. Again, if you do try to crank it up, the treble gets too much, and if you don't crank it up, then the vocals are, you know, they're not immersive. They don't have the texture, the clarity, the detail. So this is more of a niche kind of tuning, which is fine, but there's also a lot of options that does that as well. For example, the Dusk or the Pilgrim would actually be better if you want something that is more neutral but still has enough of a low end presence. They just have less kind of that, like, I don't want to say graininess, but less metallic timbre when it comes to the treble, and the vocals do pop out a little bit better on those. The overall balance is just, for most people, for most libraries, are gonna be better, and tech wise they are, you know, around the same. They're also around the same price, and even its younger brother, the 5+2, would be a better option. It feels like the vocals and the low end is a little bit better balanced, not as neutral. There's just more emphasis in the vocals, and the 5+2 is also like $100 cheaper. Performance wise, it's very close. I would say maybe the P8S is slightly better in the treble versus the 5+2, just because it comes off across more clear because of the more, you know, tamer, pulled back low end and the mids. But yeah, if you have the 5+2, keep the 5+2. Another option would be the binary EP321. Those are a lot better when it comes to the timbre, very natural sounding in the treble, and also cheaper as well. You know, more on that later. But lastly, and most importantly, if you're coming from the Explorer, if you want a upgrade, these are actually not it, even though this technically is the older brother to the Explorer. But I would actually go for the Ember if I have it here. Yeah, I would actually go for the Ember, which we'll talk about next. The Ember are the direct upgrades to Explorer. So in conclusion, I don't know if I can recommend these. Maybe on sale, maybe like $250, a little bit more than the 5+2. At that point, it's like, you know, sure, go for it. But stock price, retail price, definitely not. There are much better stuff. The timbre, the overall value, it's just quite not there. Again, the EP321, $100 cheaper. Timbre much better, smoother in the treble, stage better, detail is better. It runs circles around these if you want a balanced set. And then when it comes to like the direct upgrade to one of its, you know, younger brothers, the Explorer, that would be the Ember, which we'll talk about now. Alright, as for the Ember, these are pretty enjoyable. They're very musical. They scale very good. Again, these are the direct upgrade to the Explorer. They have the bass, impact, the texture, you have the immersion, the soundstage, you have the scaling, but the treble is not, you know, metallic, it's not sharp, it doesn't have that bite at higher volumes like the Performer 8S. They have the airiness, they have the openness. They're very good for rock, metal, you know, bands, and the vocals don't get too overly fatiguing, but they're still just enough because, again, you can crank these up at higher volume, so the vocals actually becomes more forward. These actually scale very good while still having that, you know, Explorer kind of sound, but just a little bit more detail. Now you have a little bit more air, and the overall sub-bass texture is slightly better. You have a little bit more impact. Now, even though this is technically slightly better and the tonality is slightly better to me than the Explorer, the price is also like 5 times more because you can get the Explorer for under 100 on sale. These are 500 USD for a single planar. Now, they do look pretty nice. It's got that edgy flame, you know, metal kind of like, you know, very early 2000s kind of emo look. They have the punk look, the punk vibe to it. When it comes to value, the Explorer is still the go-to set if you want a high scaling set that's bassy, that's good for rock and metal, and that's very immersive for like under $100. But if you really want that next step to the Explorer and you don't mind spending, you know, that little bit premium, because there's really not anything like this on the market, so I guess they can technically price this however they like. It just leaves a bad taste in my mouth because this is a single planar and they're charging $500. So you're mainly paying for the accessories, you know, the unboxing, the build, the cable, the effect cable, and most importantly, this is a limited run of 999 units. These basically fixes all the issues on the P8S when it comes to the scaling and the immersion factor. If you can, I would get these on sale for maybe $350 to $400. I do like the sound, it's just that it's a little bit pricey. Moving on, we got the EPZ P40s. These are basically a slightly more detailed version of the SimGot EM6L while being the same smoothness factor. It's still very good for EQ because it is very smooth, but just a little slightly more detailed now. The overall sound of these is, I would say, a bright Harman kind of sound, but they don't sound as boring as Harman because the treble is a little bit boosted. Value wise, these are pretty solid, especially if you're using for EQ like the EM6Ls. They are pretty technical, pretty resolving for the price. I would say slightly more than the Daybreaks, and around the same, maybe slightly less than the Supermix 4 and the Chopins. This is a slightly better version of the EM6Ls when it comes to the accessories, the build. Genre-wise, I would not use these for K-pop or J-pop. Anything with a lot of just like energy will make it sound too bright. It's a little bit too fatiguing because it is very boosted when it comes to the upper mids, and the treble is even more boosted than Harman. Again, this is gonna color the sound to a slightly brighter and more energetic sound, but still being pretty smooth. Like, these are smooth, it's just that it gets a little bit too bright, which means scaling wise these are not going to scale very good because of the upper mids and treble boost. This feels like a condenser 4 almost, maybe not as balanced, as clean. It makes them a pretty good listen for female vocals if you want like that sweet, brighter, you know, angelic. Male vocal wise, these can be a little bit, I don't want to say unnatural, but again, these are bright leaning, so it makes the, you know, male vocal sound brighter than usual, which could be a, you know, good or bad thing depending on what you want. I also wouldn't recommend these for hip hop because there's not enough low end, and also the upper mids and treble just makes the sound unnatural. It doesn't have the engagement in the low end. In terms of bass texture, the P40s could use more sub bass rumble. The overall impact, the slam, just overall tactility, I would say it's average. It does the job. So these are good for ballads, R&Bs, anything with a lot of energy or like a lot of low end, like again EDM, hip hop. I would say probably to watch out. But overall, these are pretty good when it comes to value. They are technical, you know, they are very versatile when it comes to EQ, very smooth. It's just that it might be a little bit bright stock, you know, for some genres, so watch out for that. But if you don't mind that brighter sound, you like the EM6L, you're maybe scared of your EM6L nozzles breaking or something like that, then these are a slightly better version of those. Moving on, we got the EP321, and these are actually very nicely done when it comes to the timbre. One of the most natural sounding sets at around $300. They're clean, they're balanced, you know, they have the technical performance, but they also don't sound completely just like dead neutral, you know, boring, like a lot of the quote-unquote all-rounder, cleaner, balanced sounding sets. This strikes a very good balance between musicality, technicality, and overall timbre. In terms of the MEMS driver, these are pretty good when it comes to treble. I wouldn't say they're as smooth as some of the newer, you know, BA super tweeters from Knowles, from Sonians, but they are better than the microplanars and the, you know, traditional BAs. I would say, you know, compared to the Hype 4 Mark IIs or some of the ESTs, those are still going to be smoother, more ethereal, and, you know, misty, airy in the sound. This is just more natural. It has a little bit more of a sharper transience to the highs, which is good and bad. I think the balance again is pretty well done, so there's not much issues when it comes to like being fatiguing. It's pretty smooth overall, and yeah, it's a very nicely tuned balanced IEM. Technical performance wise, these are actually slightly better than the P8S while being cheaper as well. The treble is more airy, it's more open, you hear a little bit more of the details, and smoother as well, and the vocals are also better extended, you know, more powerful, more clarity in the overall sound. Genre wise, these are more of an all-rounder, so they do work for pretty much everything, maybe except for like hip-hop, EDM, very bass heavy, you know, sub-bass heavy energetic tracks, because these do lack some sub-bass rumble. It is more mid-bass focused, but even then it's not really low-end heavy. It's more clean, it's more clear, it's more balanced. So if you're looking for more bass, more impact to the sound, these are probably not it for you. But if you're coming from the Chopin or maybe the Daybreaks, these would be a direct upgrade to those. In my opinion, the timbre is slightly better than them and a little bit more detailed as well. Overall, just a slight step up across the board compared to those. Aside from that, these are a pretty great value for $300. Technical performance wise, they are around the same as the Horizons, and the Horizons are very good when it comes to value, right? Not quite as smooth and airy as the Horizons. They're not as bright as the Horizon. These are a little bit more toned down when it comes to the treble energy, and the treble feels more realistic. It doesn't have, I guess, like that airy ethereal feel like the Horizons, which is good or bad depending on what you want. It's slightly sharper on the EP321s. Scaling wise, these are a mid to high volume set. You can't really crank them up too much, even though they are pretty smooth. The treble boost is there, so you're gonna run into some issues if you do try to just like fully blast them. But They do work pretty well at mid to high volumes around like 75 dBs. I think that's a pretty sweet spot for these. Overall, I would say these are a pretty great value for $300. I'm pretty sure they're gonna go on sale, so you can get these for even cheaper. And at that price, for a clean, balanced all-rounder that is still musical and engaging, these are nicely done and they get my rec. Next, we got the INTUAURA Impact and the TINHIFI T6. I'm including these two together because they are pretty similar. They both follow that EW300 kind of tonality, you know, slight bass boost, but tamer in the upper mids compared to Harman, but the treble still follows Harman 2019. So these two have a similar sound to the EW300, with the main difference being that the INTUAURA is going to be more of a musical listen. It's warmer, the bass texture is better, it slams a little bit harder, it's a little bit smoother. It doesn't have that, you know, hard, brittle, you know, timbre when it comes to the piezos. It feels more natural, the bass texture, the tactility in the low end, and the overall quote-unquote impact is just more, you know, engaging. It feels better textured. Whereas the T6 has a little bit more of that, like, you know, microplanar bite and sizzle to the treble. It feels a little bit more technical, it feels a bit cleaner, but still offers enough bass impact, enough of that bassy all-rounder sound, but just not as smooth, musical, and natural as the, you know, impact. I definitely recommend the pink nozzle, the pink ring. The other two feels just too bright, too sharp. If you're gonna get a T6, go for the pink ring. When it comes to value, both of these are pretty good. The impact is less than 100. The T6, I think it's just a little bit over like 120. So I think they are worth it because they're not like overly expensive. Now, genre-wise, both of these are a bass boosted kind of all-rounder sound. So they work for pretty much every genre. Just don't crank it up too much when it comes to K-pop with the T6. The impact does scale better. I would say these are like 75 to 80 dBs depending on the song, and then the T6 is more like 70 dBs because again of like the cleaner bass, the sharper transients when it comes to the higher frequencies. Overall, I do think these two are worth the price. Technicality wise, they are slightly better than EW300 and they don't break your bank. You can probably get these for under $100 on sale. Just watch out for the slightly sharper tonality on the T6, but aside from that, yeah, give these a shot. Moving on, we got the TANCHJIM soda, and unfortunately I can't quite say the same because even though these are pretty good as a package overall, the sound is very smooth. It's got that, you know, TANCHJIM house sound where it's a little bit neutral, balanced, but the treble is very smooth, relaxing, laid back, inoffensive. But the main issue is that the origin and the fission, both of those are very similar sounding to this. If you blind A/B test like a random audio file, they probably wouldn't tell much of a difference. Like these do have better sub bass extension and a little bit more detailed when it comes to the overall resolution. But aside from that, you can get the fission for like $120, which is half the price of the sodas, and to me, the difference isn't huge. I don't see this being 2 times better than the fission, maybe like 15% better. And for the price that it's asking for, which is $300, it's not overly expensive, but it's just that compared to the rest of the lineup, it just seems like a bit of a tough sell considering you can get the fission for a lot cheaper. I will say the overall packaging, the design, the cable is very nice. Like if you want to treat yourself, you want the better overall package, and you want a little bit better tech and, you know, better sub bass extension as well, then yeah, you can go for the sodas. I think you're not gonna go wrong with these. These are pretty safe, well balanced, clean, very smooth in the treble. Like it reminds me of even like a smoother version of the Daybreaks. So yeah, that's the second issue as well. You can also get the Daybreaks for half the price, and I would say the Daybreaks maybe even slightly more technical than the sodas when it comes to the treble detail. Not as smooth, not as, I guess, like refined in the treble, but if we're talking value, I would definitely choose either the Daybreaks or I would get the TANCHJIM Fission, and then I would save up for actually the binary EP321, which I think is just a straight up better version of the sodas. So even though this is a pretty well packaged, you know, all-rounder kind of like clean, balanced, smooth IEM, I just think for the price of $300, it gets outcompeted by the binary EP321. That one just sounds a lot more natural. The dynamics, the transients, it just feels more realistic. For example, in the cymbals, it can feel overly smoothed out when it comes to the soda, whereas the EP321 just feels just right. You get the dynamics, but you still get the airiness and the extension. And this does have more sub bass than the, you know, binary, so I guess that is a selling point. But overall, I would look around, you know, get something cheaper if you want something similar to the sound, and then get the binary EP321. So I'm gonna say maybe on sale for $200 because the packaging, the overall cable is pretty nice, and it's not a slouch when it comes to the overall performance. So I wouldn't say it's like overly priced too much, but I will wait for these on sale personally. Then lastly, we got the YANYIN Baker, and these are basically a bassier and warmer version of the ZGAT Arcanus, and you guys already know how I feel about the Arcanus, so yeah, I like these. They have a full, slightly warm, rich kind of tonality in the low end and the mid range, but it still has that slight, like, I guess the sizzle from the treble, but it's not overly done, which means when it comes to the dynamics, when it comes to the contrast, these are very vibrant, they are very musical, I guess you can say. If the Arcanus focuses more on female vocals, this is like better for male vocals, even though I do still prefer the Arcanus for vocals overall. It's just a little bit more cleaner, clear, but as a, I guess, like warmer, you know, fuller kind of all-rounder set, this is definitely more enjoyable for hip-hop, rock. Scaling wise, these are actually around like mid to mid-high volume, that you can't actually scale it too much because the treble is actually not as smooth as the Arcanus. It's a little bit peakier than the Arcanus, so you can't really crank it up as much, which means that, you know, the vocals do take a slight hit when it comes to the power, the extension, the openness. Again, this does have a slightly warmer leaning kind of sound, like full body, like a thicker tonality. It's not gonna be as angelic, right, as sweet sounding as the Arcanus. You do still get like the treble factor, like the goosebump factor like the Arcanus, because the treble is tuned very similar with like that peaks and valleys, but overall a little bit more V-shape is how I would describe it, but also fuller. Pick wise, these are pretty solid. I wouldn't say they are a value or a bargain at its price because these are $400. The Arcanus is slightly cleaner, you know, better in the separation, the layering. You hear the treble, the vocals clear, overall clarity, resolution gonna be slightly better on the Arcanus, but this is not like congested or muddy or anything like that. It's still musical, you still get the dynamics, but it's just a lot fuller and slightly bassier now. This is not quite an all-rounder like the Astros. It's not as V-shaped as the Astros. This is like warmer. It kind of reminds me of the Luna, but instead of being warm and airy, this is like less warm, a little bit more textured. Overall, I do like the sound. I would watch out for these when it comes to K-pop, J-pop, because the treble can get a little bit peaky. You can't scale it up too much. Again, watch out for that peakiness in the treble. But if you're not cranking it up too much, these are pretty musical, enjoyable, dynamic, vibrant, and contrasty in the sound while being full and not like too V-shaped. The more interesting comparison would actually be to the Ember. They actually have a similar vibe going from them, except for just the Ember is a lot bassier and smoother in the treble. This is more mid-range focus. You get a little bit more like sharpness in the attack, in the imaging versus the Ember. But value-wise, both of those are not the best. Ideally, I would wait for these to go on sale for maybe like 300, you know, around 350. I think at that price I would recommend these because they are, again, musical and vibrant to listen to for male vocals, for hip-hop, for rock and metal, stuff like that. But at the retail price, I would say just wait for a while. Aside from that, thank you guys for watching. Let me know if you're gonna get any of these new stuff. And yeah, it sucks to get shadow banned and blacklisted, but it is what it is. I do have a big announcement coming up, so stay tuned for that, and I will see you guys soon.
Shout out to Dom Q, Rox Cat, B Urak, Disco Scaldus, Walker Standard, Patrick, User, Contain Guava Juice Gains, Mr. Gorillas, Polly J, Gis Sang Young, Christopher Jackson, Henry Claudia, Son of a Horse, 777ZK, PM the Wizard, Obi, Triple Well Extended, Matt Herc, TR8107, Shrimp Backlay, FKSRG, Cousin Fat Fat, Julius Phillip, Dead Riddle, Gatoy, Nico Gabriel, Addy, Michael, Trackstar, Raphael, I'm J-Rack, Ryan, Ori, Edwin, Torcog, Effinadim, Rash, Chimika, Javier, Gilbog, Ocean, AK131, BC Knight, MN Gelato, Watjo, Vitor, Unbalanced, Tuna, Robert, Polar, Drave Gaming, JRX, Samuel, John Simon, Archie, Beefy Pigeon, The Surgeon, Evan, Forrest, Ninja Watcher, Brandon Fish, Sir Ison, JJ, Skiller, Alexa, Ali Music, and JPLA. Thank you guys so much for the support.